3 years after Allison was murdered, Ian was charged. But the state, they charged the wrong guy. Ian did not commit this crime. Ian is innocent. James Castlemeades is the one they should have charged because he is the one that did it. The evidence will show that. You're going to hear evidence about James towards the end of the trial. So please be patient and listen to all the evidence. From 2003 to 2016, Ian lived at 338 East Pierce in Tempe, Arizona. He lived there with his girlfriend, April, for much of that time, his daughter, Peyton, and April's son, Matthew. You will hear that Ian and April were in the sunsets of their relationship in 2015. Their relationship spanned more than a decade. They had their ups and downs. There were times when Ian and April were separated, and Ian had another girlfriend. You will hear that they weren't getting along in 2015. That you will hear that in April's eyes, Ian couldn't do anything right. For April, Ian's drinking was a problem. Ian's drinking was a reason he wasn't home. Ian tried to avoid April. April was making book on Ian. She kept a diary from 2012 all the way to 2016. And in that diary, she documented the comings and the goings of him and everything that he did wrong. When he was home, when he wasn't home, what he looked like, what he was doing, and anything that she saw that would help build her case for custody, she marked down. She kept this diary on her phone. And you're going to hear from April. Ian went to work. Ian came home. Ian took his daughter to daycare every day. But at the end of the day, he didn't always come home at night. He'd go to the gym. He might go out for a drink. He might go to a strip club. He avoided April. He avoided being at home. He avoided being there to have a conflict with her. On February 17th, 2015, Ian was home in the morning. He had his normal day. He got up, he took Peyton, his daughter, to daycare, and then went to work. He went to work, he worked at NetVest, which is over on Bahia Drive, just east of the 101 by Westworld. It's a financial company. He worked there. Ian has a degree from ASU in finance, business. So on that day, he went to work. He had lunch at Twin Peaks. He spent $27.40. He went back to work. At the end of the day, 4:45, he made a call to a friend. Made another call to his workout buddy to see if they would go working out. Ian worked out at the EOS, which is at Raintree and Northsight. It's directly behind the Kohl's that you just heard about. At some point that evening, Ian went to his brother's house. You're going to hear from his brother, whose name is Craig. You're going to hear that Ian went to his house because Ian needed money. Ian was behind on what his income should be and the bills that he needed to pay. Ian had a DUI in January of 2015. Ian had to hire an attorney for that. And Craig, big brother, was going to help him with that. So Craig would give Ian money. when he needed it. He loaned Ian $1,000 that night. He loaned him $1,000 to pay for things so that Ian wouldn't fall behind on his mortgage. He wouldn't fall behind on his taxes. He wouldn't fall behind on his electric bill. You're going to hear that Ian deposited that $1,000 at the bank on Scottsdale and Earl. You're going to hear that Craig, who was at the time working for Cemex, he worked at a plant. He was the manager of that plant. It's now Vulcan Materials. And that he would work nights for the most part, or 2 to 10 generally, at, I guess, third shift or second shift. And nobody knew his schedule, except that that's when he was usually home sometime after 10:30. Ian would go to his house. This wasn't the first time that Ian borrowed money from Craig. Craig's that big brother. Craig's born in 1962. Ian's born in 1975. Craig and Ian have lived together. When Ian graduated high school, Craig was the person that brought him into the house, and he stayed there during his college career. Craig sometimes steps into the role of dad, much to this disdain of Ian. But that night, he was going to give Ian money. But along with that, getting money from the big brother, you got the lecture. You got the lecture about, shipping up or shipping out kind of thing. Listen to this, lay off this, do that. It came with strings. And it was when Craig was ready for it. If Craig came home and he was tired from the end of the day, from working, put his feet up and he made Ian wait. He made him wait till he was good and ready to get that money out of the safe and give it to Ian. And Ian needed that money because he was moving money around in his bank accounts. He had to pay his mortgage. He had to cover that mortgage. So he needed that $1,000. You're going to see Ian's bank statements. You're also going to see that Ian made a deposit the next day as well. And that he made $1,500 deposits. He wrote his bills on the 18th and 19th. You're going to see his check register. You're going to see his bank records. You're going to see Ian's financials. You're also going to see that in Ian's house, he had an office that he built. This is where April says he would go at night when he was avoiding her and Peyton and Matthew. He would just go into his office and do whatever. In that office, there was a safe. And that safe, when you pressed the buttons, it made sounds. And she could hear it. And I didn't want to wake her up. So that Tuesday night, Ian went to Craig's house. And he waited. Now, Craig lives at 38th and Earl, or 38th and Thomas, which is here in Phoenix. After Craig gave him the lecture, gave him the money, Ian went to that ATM on Scottsdale and Earl, a place that he's deposited money for many times. And he deposited the money, 1228. Then he went down Scottsdale Road, and he went to his house. And his house is just off of Continental, which is south of McDowell, on Pierce. And he came home, and it was probably close to 1 o'clock. Ian didn't kill Allison. He was at his brother's house. You're going to hear Officer Carlucci talk about how she was running patrol in that area in South Scottsdale, and at how she ran the plates on that Mustang at 1241. And she was actually in the process of pulling up over somebody else, unrelated, near that Circle K on the corner. That Circle K is on the corner where Ian would turn right and go into his neighborhood. It's only a few blocks from his home. After she finished that traffic stop, she ran the plates again. There was another officer, Officer Capucci. They were working in tandem, kind of on the same squad. He ran the plates. They can't tell you anything about that night, what they did or how they got that. Carlucci, she says she would have probably observed the Mustang. Capucci doesn't know if he got a text, if he observed, he doesn't know. He has no recollection. Only thing he's got is he ran the plates and then went to the next screen which showed that Craig owned that car. Ian was home by 12:45, by 1 o'clock. Ian is innocent. The state charged the wrong guy. You will hear that Ian does not live anywhere near Allison. Ian lives on the west side of Scottsdale Road, south of McDowell. His neighborhood's not near hers. He doesn't know her. He's never been to her house. There's no connection whatsoever between the two of them. Ian certainly didn't kill or sexually assault or burglarize Allison's house. What I want to talk to you about is a preview of what this trial is going to be. You guys saw the calendar in your jury questionnaire. Over the next several weeks, even months, you're going to hear from a lot of people. You're going to hear from police officers, crime scene specialists. You're going to hear from some civilians too. You're going to hear from lab techs. You're going to hear from detectives, police officers, anybody who touched this case, and it's going to take a while. Please be patient. There will be times when the defense asks questions, and there may be a lot of questions. But there may also be times when there are none, or very few. Allison was murdered. No question about that. The scene is what it is. The investigation is what it is. But Ian didn't kill Allison. Somebody else did. And that somebody is James Casamedes. You're going to hear about how the scene was processed. You're going to hear from the crime scene specialist and the detectives who were in charge of that, and how they were at the house from the 18th to the 21st. You're going to hear how they collected samples. And when I say collected samples, that means they were swabbing samples. They used like a Q-tip. And it's a big Q-tip, like maybe 8 to 10 inches long. It's got like the little wad at the end. And what they do is they rub real hard. And they try to turn the swab over and over so that they can get through the grease, the grime, and whatever to pull up any biological material. And they did that. They went through the dirt and the grime and got whatever they could in search of biological material. You're going to hear from the Scottsdale Crime Lab and other experts how sensitive DNA kits have become, how little DNA evidence you need to get a profile. We're talking nanograms or picograms, like a granule of sugar. That's how much DNA or cellular material is required. That's how far DNA kits have come in the last 25 years. You're going to hear the number of swabs, the number of samples that the Scottsdale Police Department and the crime scene specialist from the Scottsdale Crime Lab took. You're going to hear not only did they take swabs of the items, for whatever wasn't nailed down, they took, and then they swabbed it again. You're going to hear how that scene was processed through those days and how things were moved around, gone through, and that Literally, they went through everything. That was the scene. You're going to hear how the Scottsdale Police Department, that very day, after Alex arrived and they were called at 4 o'clock, how they worked till 9, 10 o'clock at night. How they cast a wide net on who could have done this. You're going to hear how the police officers, immediately after clearing the house, they went out and started knocking on doors. You're going to hear that the first responders literally knocked on 30 doors the night of the 18th. You're going to hear that no person was too remote. You're going to hear that Detective McWilliams was the original case agent. You're going to hear that Detective Heinzelman was in charge of the scene. Now they worked in tandem. You're going to hear that there were sergeants, lieutenants, and that the Scottsdale Police Department responded, and it was all hands on deck. Anybody who was available came. Didn't matter if you were in the violent crimes unit. If you were available and your sergeant called you, you came to the scene and you got assigned a task. And detectives from other units went out, interviewed people, surveilled people, gathered information on people. Hundreds of people were contacted, even at the very beginning in the first few days. Over 170 people gave a buccal swab. A buccal swab is basically the police officer would go to the house, talk to the people there, and they would ask each and every male to open their mouth and swab the cheek so that they could get a saliva sample to get DNA profile. You will hear from the first responders that there was no forced entry in this house. There was nothing to indicate that someone broke a window, broke a door. There's no door frames that are, off. There's no broken glass from a window in the house. You will hear that Scottsdale cast this wide net, put it out on social media, asked for tips. They even had a web tip line. And people called in. People called in from all over and had all kinds of things. You will hear how Scottsdale Police Department, at least at the very beginning, responded to almost every tip. You will hear about the neighborhood canvass. You will hear how many times they canvassed the neighborhood, how many times they knocked on the door. When I say canvassed the neighborhood, they literally knocked on the door and said to people, do you have any information about this homicide? And then they would ask each and every person who was male, can I take a buccal swab? Yet you're going to hear how they did miss some people. They would knock on the doors, they would talk to people, but some people weren't home. Even on the first nights, one of the officers went to 30 houses and he said that, several people from like 4 or 5, the very first 4 or 5, weren't home. You're going to hear about one of the people that they missed was a person who, close in time, may have observed or had important information about the possible killer. You're going to hear that the Scottsdale Police Department went to his house, talked to his parents. They never talked to him. It wasn't until 2017 when they got to go back to him and talk to him. 2 years had passed. You're going to hear about how Scottsdale Police Department contacted or even surveilled any potential suspect. You're going to hear how the sex crimes unit contacted the sex offenders that were living in the area. They went to a tire shop and watched one of them You're going to hear how the Scottsdale Police Department contacted Allison's ex-boyfriend, people that she knew, friends, family. You're going to hear how anybody who came in close proximity with Allison was talked to. You're going to hear about the tree trimmer. You're going to hear about the UPS driver. You're going to hear about the pool guy. You're going to hear about different people in that neighborhood. And despite being kind of a quiet Scottsdale neighborhood, there were several transients in the area. And those people were contacted too. And a DNA swab was taken from them. You're going to hear how Alex, not only was he investigated, but several of his friends were talked to by the Scottsdale Police Department. You're going to hear that they gave buccal swabs. While they followed up on several leads, at some point, the investigation was kind of like traveling, rabbit holes, right? You go talk to somebody, and you didn't get much more than that. Scottsdale Police Department kind of changed the investigation, and it became kind of two veins of investigation. First was the vein to look into Alex. Look into Alex, look into every aspect of his affairs. Get at his bank records. Get at his cell phone records. Look at his financials. Look at his emails. Look at his texts. Look at his social media. And this spanned over 2 years. They continued to talk to Alex, and anytime something came up that they found out, they went back and talked to him again. They did a deep dive into Alex. The second vein of investigation relied on that DNA, that PMH. They got information. They went and talked to the person that the information was about and asked for a buccal sample. And if that person gave that buccal sample, it was immediately tested against PMH. And if it matched or it didn't match PMH, that person was excluded and they moved on. No further down that rabbit hole, no further down that investigation path. You're going to hear how Scottsdale Police Department went to far end, so to speak, to get that buccal swab because they were putting all their eggs in that basket. That PMH was their guy. If it wasn't Alex, it was PMH. And everything should fall into place. You're going to hear how the Scottsdale Police Department, when one person said, I'm not giving you a buccal sample, here's my alibi. They talked to the alibi. He says, yeah, he was home with me, putting up a shelf. Not good enough. They followed that guy down to Tucson, waited for him to go through a Starbucks, waited for him to finish his Starbucks, and as he put that cup in the trash, Scottsdale Police Department was ready there to get it. And they got that sample, ran his DNA, but guess what? It didn't match age. He was excluded, never talked to again. And that was from a tip at Scottsdale Police Department that this guy had something there. You heard, or you will hear, how Detective Heinzman even traveled to New Mexico to talk to a person who was in custody for a murder that was similar in nature, that they had used bleach to cover up the scene. Detective Heinzman went and talked to that person, got that buccal swab, he didn't match age. Done. That's how this investigation went. I'm going to tell you, DNA does not lie, but it doesn't tell a story. DNA can tell you the who, but it cannot tell you the how or the when the DNA got there. You will hear from DNA experts who will tell you about DNA. DNA is not like a fingerprint. Fingerprints, you have to be present to put it down. DNA is not like that. It moves freely, like a cold in the air, or like dust in the wind. Remember, it's small like a granule of sugar, and DNA only comes from cellular material. So it moves freely around. Scottsdale Police Department used it to prevent going down rabbit holes. They shouldn't have done that. DNA is a piece of evidence at best. No more than that. It does not tell the story. You cannot ignore other information. You have to consider everything. As you all know, this is an important case. Scottsdale Police Department spent 3 years investigating this case. They took a shortcut. And while it might have seemed appropriate at the time so that they didn't spend eternity going down, as they would call rabbit holes, or I'd call rabbit holes, that shortcut ended up charging the wrong guy. You're going to hear about some of the leads that they did follow up on, and to the extent that they did or didn't do. I told you about James K., or James Castlemedes. You're going to hear about him. He was her pharmacist. And in 2015, on February 21st, just 6 days after the murder, there was a tip that led Scottsdale Police Department to interview him at the Walgreens that he worked. He was her pharmacist. He knew who she was. They got a buccal swab. Guess what? He didn't match PMH. So he was excluded. Now, other tips came in from him. They were not followed up on. Or for him, they were not followed up on. Till July of 2016, the Scottsdale Police Department received information from another call from other parties that they had learned of some information or about James Castlemedes. And they told the Scottsdale police that he had made some concerning statements regarding the homicide. Scottsdale Police Department followed up on that. You're going to hear Detective Heinzelman and Detective McWilliams went to his house right after talking to those people, within 15 minutes. They got another buccal swab. Now, they observed him already drinking. This is 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He's drinking a Leinenkugel. Now, that might not be anything, but that's the beer that was at Allison's house. That might not be anything. They didn't follow up. They didn't follow up and learn about him. They kind of wiped their hands clean of it, kind of moved on. This is 2016. They did not check his phone. They did not check his social media. They did not check his dating sites. They were in his house. They didn't get a search warrant for his house. Arguably, if they did, they might have found that phone, her wallet, that blanket. All the things that they say are missing. They didn't do any of that. He didn't match PMH. They had already known that when they were going there. It was a kind of, I'm going to dot my I's and cross my T's, and in fact, Detective Heinzelman told James K. that he would tell his boss that he went and followed up on this. That's unacceptable. You're going to hear that if they would have investigated further on James, They could have talked to his girlfriend, who was one of those tips that they never followed up on. His friends, and even his neighbors. You're going to hear about their observations of James. You're going to hear from his girlfriend that on occasion he strangled her. He also tackled her, pushed her into a fridge. And guess what? He lived on 87th Street in Osborne, less than a half a mile from the victim. You're going to hear how he walked the alleys at night. And of course, drank the same beer that was at the scene. You're going to hear all about him, and you're going to hear from those witnesses. And with the information they learned, they should have done more. They should have done more with him. Ian's innocent. Ian didn't kill Allison. Ian didn't sexually assault Allison. Ian didn't burglarize that house. Ian's never been there. The state charged the wrong person. I'm going to ask you to be patient, listen to the evidence in this case. Listen to the processes that the Scottsdale Police Department took and what they did not do. In your instructions, you heard that you were able to ask questions. I encourage you to ask questions if you have them. At the end of this trial, you will be asked to make a determination of whether you're firmly convinced with no real possibility of innocence. The evidence will show that Ian was with his brother, then home. Someone else killed Allison. The state did not charge him, and he is not on trial. But ladies and gentlemen, what you'll find is that Ian is innocent, and that's the real possibility of innocence. And I'm going to ask you to find him not guilty of all the charges. Thank you.